Hi, everyone. So glad you could join us again today for our Grief Healing Telesummit. Top experts share their best holistic healing methods to transform grief into healing and living again. I'm Chelsea Hansen, your host, founder of With Sympathy Gifts and Keepsakes, as well as Global Grace, the World Association of Spiritual Grief Healing. Today, our special guest is Angie Cartwright. Angie has a really unique background. She is the founder of the National Grief Awareness Day, which occurs on August 30th, so she'll be telling us a little bit about that. She is also the co-founder of We Care Grief Support, and she also offers grief coaching as well as a grief release course. She has a huge Facebook community called Grief the Unspoken, and she has over 180,000 people involved in her community. Unfortunately, she has experienced the pain of loss many times in her life, including the loss of her little sister and husband, and learned the hard way that those who grieve are often marginalized and misunderstood. But now, through her work, she's helping people tear off the masks of I'm fine and I'm okay, and instead encourages people to grieve honestly and freely, and above all, embrace their feelings. Angie, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, and I actually was getting a little emotional reading how you help so many people. That's awesome.
Oh,
Can you
thank you.
tell us a little of how you got involved in your line of work, like through your personal losses and healing, and what led you to this big mission you have now?
Oh, I would love to. I guess for me, everyone started to kind of hear my name back in 2010 when my mother had passed away from a drug overdose. But to go back a little bit before that, as you were reading some of my losses, I started experiencing loss at the age of 5, and it's when I was 5 years old, and I had a sister that was 11 months old and passed from bronchial pneumonia, and I had woke up as a normal ornery 5-year-old, and I knew my sister had been very ill, and wanted to check on her, and I could just tell she had passed. And in that moment, what also happened for me as a child was that I had this awful feeling of losing a mother, because she was a grieving mother as I look back now, and so that started out my life in a way, and then we move up to when I was around 14, my favorite uncle, Tony, was found. He had died by suicide. He had schizophrenia, and that just rocked our family to no end. And my mother, as my mother as well, and a grandfather I lost by suicide, and so on and so on. And by the time I was 21, I was a young married wife. 21's pretty young, and my husband and I were driving, and he was intoxicated, and he wrecked our car, and I was a passenger in that car, and he was killed instantly.
Oh,
and I think that's I think that's where I started my I don't want to call it some of my darkest times were after that. I had no coping skills whatsoever for grief, and really wouldn't have even called it grief at that time. This was in 1996, and had a lot of survivor's guilt at that time. Because I had said that night I didn't want to drive. And so, I said I didn't want to drive, and he's like, okay, that's okay, I'm the driver. And so, you're 21 and you think you can live forever, and at those ages sometimes, and I did. But I went on to cope with unhealthy ways, with alcohol and things like that, to cope with that pain, instead of embracing my pain. And then, and that lasted for many, many years. And I've lost some friends on the way. A couple different friends committed suicide. I laid a really good friend to rest. She died from a drug overdose. And several pets. I love my pets, and I had to lay them to rest. Yes, I love my animals.
Yeah, I hear
we grieve those too. And because we do grieve other ways. I also talk about it a lot, but I live in chronic pain, and I'm feeling better than I ever have. But I was in pretty good health for a long, long time, and in between 2005 and 2006, I got diagnosed with fibromyalgia. And my whole life was just turned upside down, and I was trying to go to college and things like that. And so I really grieved the body that I had before, and didn't know it. Didn't know that was what it was. They called it depression.
Oh.
Yeah, they called it depression. And it's, so, as we've talked before, depression and grief mimic each other a lot. And so I treated the grief of the loss of my body, functions or pain, with antidepressants, and lived pretty, it didn't work. I was sad no matter what I did. And so so those kinds of things happen in our life too, and that's something that I've experienced. But we move up to, I would say, around 2009. I had 7 years of recovery. And my mother, who I had shared addiction with when I was a child, that's a whole nother story, had about 4 years or 5 years of sobriety. And she had went through some back surgeries, and I was going through some pain. Our individual, we had our own individual stuff we were facing, and we found ourselves sharing addiction again and fell out of recovery. And I just knew that life was never for me, and I didn't want to be there. And so I soon went to get help and, get back into recovery. And my mom, I'll never forget it. It was 3 days before she passed, and it was a simple conversation. I said to her, Mom, we probably need to go and get into recovery or we're not going to make it. I was trying to be kind with her and not pushy. And she said, Angie, I just don't think I can do that. And it was days later that I had a friend come over and tell me they had found her. She was 51 years old. And so that's how actually Grief the Unspoken started, was finding myself, because from 2003 to almost 2007, I had started to heal. I had started to, work with ministers and mentors and really dig inside of myself and find some answers and deepen my faith and those kinds of things. And so this stuff happens, and we get bumps in the road. That sometimes for people, they start really getting into living again, and life deals them something else. And so we can be knocked down many times, some of us. And so I'm a fighter, if you can't tell.
Yeah, I know. You have the warrior energy of helping everyone in your community.
Yeah. Yeah, that rings true with me. I've said often that you have to fight for hope. Sometimes it doesn't just come, and that was something that I had this victim image of myself, and I'm not going to say I was never victimized, because I was. But I also had resentments at those things, and I felt like, all these things were happening to me, and my mom's death really was not about me. It was about her. But when you experience it, it's all about me, and it was in my grief. And so that's where I had started a really small Celsa, small little closed group. And it started with about 50 people the first week.
On Facebook?
On Facebook. And that's where it all began for me, as far as from there to you and I talking right now and all of the growth in between.
Yeah, I know with the 180,000 people in your community, that's a lot of people that are getting help from you and each other. And I'm just wondering, all the tragedy and losses that you went through, it's probably just, unfortunately, part of your soul contracts to go through all this, and now you're able to help so many people through what you learned about tearing off the mask of grief, coping skills, getting through some really tough things. So, yeah, I wish we didn't have to go through all these learning experiences, but I guess that's not how it works.
Right.
Yeah, so tell us then about National Grief Awareness Day, and that happens on August 30th, and what is the intention of that event, or tell us how that works?
Well, there's, for me, there's several intentions, and I love talking about this day. First of all, we do have a national, and I did not claim this day, but there is a National Children's Grief Awareness Day. Happens in November. And when I came on the scene, I looked around. I had a lot of people encourage me to start this. We didn't just have a National Grief Awareness Day for everyone. And so with a lot of support and a lot of, that warrior in me, and maybe a little anger at the time. Sometimes we talk bad about anger, but if anger can be filtered into positive things, it can be a place of change.
Sure, by releasing that anger.
So sometimes, so sometimes, being angry can be good, and so I turned that anger into National Grief Awareness. It happens to be my mother's birthday.
Okay.
Yeah. And she was an misunderstood grieving mother, grieving sister, sibling. And I misunderstood her myself. I was younger and...
Tell us what you mean by misunderstood, how grieving people are misunderstood.
Yeah, as I look back, I tell you, I had only what was passed on to me. That was it. And so we can only pass on what we know.
Sure, the pattern.
Yeah. And so as I saw her sitting there in her pain, I would often try to encourage her to do something, take an action.
Sure.
And some of it would be the cliches. Even as a young child, I'd say them in a sense, but I also would get very discouraged with her because I could see that it was destroying her. And you get to where you get scared for the griever themselves. You don't know what to do, and you just want to provide them with this answer,
Yeah.
And so, and until you experience that, we find that there are answers, but the answers come in their own time and in their own way, and they're not that simple sometimes.
Yeah, and they're usually not from the person who wants to help you, right? You're finding them yourself.
Yes, because one thing I know about grief, for me, may not be for everyone else because we've said it's unique, is that when I am in that most horrific place, because not all losses were horrific. They hurt, but they didn't hurt like maybe to the extent that my husband did or my mother. I didn't want to hear from the family around me. Grief picks up all those old stories or people who weren't maybe in my mom's life or who hurt her or who hurt me in the past. And so you kind of close yourself off to your family and even sometimes to your closest friends without really realizing it.
What do you tell your people that you help, like how to break out of that then? Or is there a way to prevent it? Like if someone's, I imagine if they're getting support immediately in the grief process, that might be able to be prevented. But yeah, what do you do to help people with that issue? Because that's really significant.
Well, I think the thing is that I had to finally see that I had the tools already inside of me. We are made like that. We are made as survivors.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we are just born that way. But when something like this knocks us down, it's really hard to stand back up without help. And I will have to just add here a little bit because we touched on National Grief Awareness Day. We are undoing, and you're part of that, Chelsea, we are undoing the damage that's been done by a lot of myths and cliches, and trying to bring change into the grief world. And it's happening. So many people are, and it's not that the people before who were educating did something wrong. You know, it's kind of like we're all blind in the dark and we're just trying to find our way. And so we did the best that we could then, and things are changing as we can see the problems, you know, today. But when a griever gets harmed from whether it be therapy, like them saying things, and it's happening still, sadly, you know, you need to move on, things like that, because we're back at the problem with communication. Then they shut themselves off. So,
yeah, right.
You know, so I want to do, what I had figured out for myself was to grieve freely and honestly, is that I had to just say I didn't need anybody's permission to grieve. I started educating myself on grief and understanding that there's no separation between me and the grief. We are one at that time. I am grieving. It's not bad. We can be empowered from that point because no one, I always felt like people were trying to take away my right to grieve. And in some sense, when you hear those comments, it can be taken that way.
Right, and I think the people maybe, because they're, I'm sure we've said this a million times, but it's probably because they're so uncomfortable. They just want you to feel better. So you do feel the pressure that, oh, I need to feel better, when really you don't feel better.
Yeah, right. So my mission was, if we could, it's my hope within, well, I would love it to happen today, but like I said, we're all trying to help change the way the world looks at grief. That, you know, when a loss happens, the support people can say, you know, this is what we can expect. We can expect them to be their hair a mess and their house a mess, and there isn't no real time frame here, and she may do it differently than I, and not take that personal. And also trying to help the griever understand the support person and what they may be going through, trying to support them. If that makes sense.
Yeah, because even the support person, they're in pain because they don't know how to help you, the bereaved person. Right. They're scared, like how you alluded to earlier. You get scared for the person.
Sure.
So tell us what happens then on August 30th.
Okay. Well, this year, what we're doing is, and we've already launched the project. We are asking for those who would love to join us. We are asking people to make videos and tell their story.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and we've already had some submissions. There are people who are just on fire with it. And then we have people who, you know, they don't really want their family or people around them to really, you know, see that. So they're going to remain anonymous, but they're going to share. They're going to share a grief video written with slides. So in some way so we want to allow them either way to be able to be expressive, because really that's part of the awareness is, you know, grief needs and wants to come out. And I, as a griever, when I was in an active grieving, I have to find my strength, my voice. Like I said, sometimes you have to fight for hope. And so I found that those little, in the very beginning, Chelsea, when I was talking to the other grievers in the group, that's where that began for me, the empowerment, was just sharing my story. And one person would share with the next, and I can see it today, you know, people who have been maybe around for a year or two, and how they've, you know, they're into therapy now or working with grief coaches or whatnot. And they're still there, and sometimes they provide support, but they're not there in those dark days. And so telling your story is such an important thing, and you can tell it as many times as it takes.
let's tell the listeners how that works, just because you have your Facebook community, but then you said 17 different closed groups, and just the word closed just means private. So actually other people can, if they go to your website or actually to your Facebook page, they can join these groups free of charge. So you give them a great outlet to tell their stories, like you're saying, with people who get it, people who are there right now.
Right.
And it is nice that it's private, so they have the option of either being in the open community or the private community, depending on how they feel. So kudos to you for setting that up, and what a difference social media has made, since some of the losses we've had years ago. It's a big change in the landscape. So that's awesome.
Yeah, we are blessed. Yes, we are blessed. The closed group, in the beginning was, I would have to be honest, a ranting place for me, and I was telling my story, and I felt so mistreated, misunderstood, marginalized, like we've talked about before, and I just needed to get it out, and I needed to not harm my family. You know what I mean? And I talk about grieving freely, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but, you have to start somewhere. And so what I have seen is those closed groups are a platform to a beginning. And they are closed, and we welcome anybody.
And tell us the name of your Facebook page. So it would be facebook.com/
Grief the Unspoken.
So just Grief the Unspoken. So even if you're on Facebook, you can type in Grief the Unspoken, and people will find your site. So very good.
If you can find your way to my page, Grief the Unspoken. Also in our notes section at the very top of our page, I have some notes in there, and one of the notes is about our closed grief groups, and you'll find all the links you need right there in one spot.
Okay, awesome. And I know years ago when I lost my mom, for me, it was about 17 years ago. I was just thinking that earlier. It was 1996, so,
wow.
we were just doing email.
Yeah, I don't think I ever remember touching a computer really back then.
Yeah, so kind of funny, and I know that I, at the time, didn't know where to go. I ended up going to a counselor. In my particular case, it wasn't helpful because this person wasn't trained in grief. But when you're a brand new griever, you don't know any of this stuff. Like, okay, I'm going to go to a counselor. Oh, but then I should find a counselor who's actually trained in grief. Yeah. So even with the Internet, all these resources are now out there so people can get this basic information to help them. Besides just the books that are at Barnes & Noble, now we have the whole Internet to direct you to places that can help so you can find a fit that works for you.
Yeah, social media is such a great blessing. For myself, I lived in a town that had the only resource for grieving at the time that we had in 1996 was for the hospice patients.
Sure.
And that they're beautiful people, and it was wonderful. But I was 21, and my husband had died from drinking and driving, and I really just felt like I didn't fit in, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
and
right.
it was very limited back then. Yeah.
Sure. I hear you. So, when the grievers, misunderstood or perhaps marginalized from what people say, what do you suggest they do so they don't take this to heart, so they really do give themselves permission to grieve? Like, how do you get the normal person to give themselves permission to be open and honest and free? Like, what tips do you suggest?
Okay. The thing is I guess with we were just talking about with all the education that's out there now, if you had a problem, let's just say you had, we look up WebMD a lot, don't we? If we have a medical problem, we want to go get all informed. Yeah, we want to get all informed about, what are the side effects? What could happen? All that stuff. So it's really good for you to just be as educated as you can be for yourself first, and you're going to find out that this is a known fact, is that let's expect it for a while. Like I said, I hope one day that we don't have to expect some of those things. that we can change the language around grief. But for now, some of that stuff's still here. And so if you're already expecting that, you're not going to be shocked. So the first one is to be expecting it. The second is to know that if someone comes up to you, and I'm not going to, this isn't talking about the people who are just downright cold.
Oh, sure.
That's not the people we're talking about. But if your friend comes to you and says, I know you can be strong, be strong, those kinds of, kind of things they say, your friend is actually just trying to tell you that they care for you and they don't want to lose you. And so that's just their way of saying that. And if we can understand that, we can expect that, we're not going to be maybe as defensive. If that makes sense.
That's an important point because, like, if someone told me to be strong, I might get a little offended. I'm like, I just want to fall apart. But then if you, like you're saying, if you look through their intention, they are concerned about you. Yeah, they care for you. That's just their way of showing it. So, I'm with you.
Yeah. And you wanted to talk about grieving freely a little bit?
Yeah.
You guys hear that. They hear that all the time from me, and I get the question, what does that mean? And it's all sorts of different things because everybody is different. And somebody said, what do you mean, Angie? Do you want me to go in the middle of the road and just scream? Well, if you need to, go ahead, You know what I mean? But that's not what I was really talking about. But, of course, yes, I mean, if you need to express the anger, go out to the country and take a drive and scream if you need to. It's not a bad thing to do. But what I meant by that is that, and who helps us to do this is ourselves. I was in grief. I'm the one that needed to be okay with these feelings. They're so uncomfortable anyway. And what I mean by okay is that maybe at an acceptance level. We want everybody else to accept it, but I'm finding it hard to accept it, and I'm struggling with allowing you to know that today was not good, that I haven't bathed in 2 days, and I forgot the kitchen even existed, so my husband's still hungry. And you know what I mean? And I have this thing to pull it together, to just keep it together, because, we do have these cliches and sayings, and people want us to feel good. But see, the thing is, I'm a bad mind reader. I don't know about you. I think I know what people want from me.
Yeah, right.
And I've been wrong all the time. So, and I'm not saying there aren't some that really just need me to pull it together. There are those occasions, but really, I'm the one that is. It's hard to be vulnerable. It really is. It's really hard to be vulnerable on a continuous basis and say, no, I'm not having a real good day, but thank you for asking. Because when I lie, it makes my grief intense. It makes it worse. I can't even hardly talk to the person that I'm lying to. And so my experience is that, if I have a friend who I feel like I need to be better with, I would keep them out of my life. So there goes another relationship that I've lost, which creates grief. And it can create a landslide of grief because we break away from those we love and care for because we're not able to say, no, I'm not okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, like, it's when someone asks you how you are, and then we say, I'm fine. And, of course,
exactly. Yes.
Fine.
I'm fine.
So maybe someone, when they catch them saying, I'm fine, I'm okay, maybe they could say something like, well, I am having a tough day, like you said, just to kind of open the conversation up. Yeah. Is that what you would suggest?
Yes. And see, like I said, we're different people. You came up with that idea in your head because you're not Angie. You know what I mean? And so the way you reply is with the sentence, a very short sentence, I'm not doing very well. Thank you for asking. And if you decide you want to talk about it, go for it. If you don't, you can say, how are you? And it does open a door, and it opens the door for me. It opens the door inside of me because the one thing that grief did to me is I wanted to isolate. I don't know about you, Chelsea.
Sure,
when you're hurting really bad.
Yeah.
When you're hurting really bad, we really don't want to be around people much. And if we do, it might be a few. then of course, one day goes into the next, and now we're out to a month, and life is pushing you forward whether you want to or not. And you're going to run into these people, and you don't need to paint yourself, which I have done many times, into this really closed-off world.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with you. We're just grieving. It's a very natural and normal reaction to feel completely a mess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and I guess that's something, that's a big thing for someone who's newly bereaved. Like everyone, well, I shouldn't say everyone, but a lot of people wonder, am I going crazy? And no, you're not. You're just in pain. Right. You're just in grief. Yeah. So it is giving yourself permission. And in our lives, I think we do not give ourselves permission for so many different things. So then when we go into grief, we just kind of act the same way we always have on how we face situations. So it's almost like as you're grieving and healing, you almost have to break out of your old patterns if you really do want to heal. Or
go ahead.
Yeah, to some degree, it's like it's hard enough you're grieving, and then all this other stuff is impeding my progress, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, yeah, that makes complete sense. I know out of my experience that I had a lot of resentments and there's where that warrior came in when I started my fight back into grieving and living again, is that I had a lot of resentments at people who had maybe mistreated me in the past with the grief thing. One time I had a loved one throw a grief pamphlet at me. It had been like 6 months when my husband had been killed, and they said, you need to move on with your life. And that was a harmful experience that I had. And so, but see, the thing is those experiences weren't tons. Those were a few experiences, but that resentment lasted for a very long time. When my mother passed, it came back up again, and basically it's like a prejudice that everybody's going to be like that. Mm-hmm. So I did go back to that place, like you said, and that place really for me, I found out, is just a comfortable place to be in.
Mm-hmm.
It keeps me away from you, and it keeps me from having to deal with other people because I am isolating. And what I found out is that not everybody is like that, and that I can't allow that resentment to be in my life anymore, because it's not going to help me in this journey.
And what tool would you recommend for a person to help break out of that resentment or break out of those stuck patterns? Like, what have you found successful? I don't know if you've ever heard of "I'm sick of tired of being sick and tired." Is it a book?
I don't know. The quote goes around everywhere.
Oh, I'm almost like, is that a book? But yeah, I know what you mean.
You know what? It may be. We'll have to look that up.
Yeah,
but,
I don't know.
When people get to that place in their lives where, the pain is enough, too much, that's normally when we have to, make some decision. Hopefully, we reach out for some counseling or some grief coaching, things like that. But the honest truth is no matter if you have counseling or if you have grief coaching, whatever you have in front of you, you have to fight for that. You have to say, you know what? And this is what came to me one day. You know what, Angie? No one's going to fight for you. No one's going to make you feel better unless you give them permission to come into your life.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really was a decision. And it was a scary one. I can say it to you real simply in a sentence. Oh, what's the tool? Well, give yourself permission. But it wasn't easy. I had to practice it on. And I was going to tell you that the other day I was having a hard time. I always call it Mom Day. My mom's been gone 3 years, and so all of that stuff was back for me. And it's sitting there on my lap, and And I went and I talked to a minister about it, and I got the feelings out. But I had to remind myself that this was okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to allow my minister in. He was sitting across the room. We were actually at a meeting. And I had looked at him, and I go, do I go talk to him or do I not? Do I go talk to him or do I not? And, the tears are right there at the edge of my,
Sure.
in the top of my chest here. And I want to spit all these words out. But, these are the things that come in. Oh, I don't want to bother him. Or it's been a long time. I think I can handle it on my own. Those are the kind of things that I can tell myself that get in the way of my healing.
Sure. Yeah, the kind of excuses or limiting thoughts, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think
lots of fear.
And when you ask yourself that question, should I talk to him or should I not talk to him? I think the point that you're even bringing that question up is your answer.
There you go.
Yes.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Yes, I love that. If it's surfacing, it's time,
Yeah.
There's my sign, as they used to say. There's your sign.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But I know you kind of get stuck in your comfort level of feeling awful,
Yeah, and what's changed for me, I've done some grief work over the years, and what's changed for me is I had that mom day, and I don't want to say it was a whole day, but I was able to join my family that evening, and I was able to laugh that night, and I was able to function the next morning, and so I might have had a little bit of a migraine, but I was able to, go back to living. I wasn't stuck in it. Yeah. Yeah,
and two, I know you also talk about, self-care, how to take care of yourself during grieving. And I just thought of that because with the migraine, after I lost my mom, I had, migraine headaches probably for 6 months to a year, and I never had them before. So it is that physical. Grief physically affects our body. Can you explain a little bit of how that works or how people can combat that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, when we're grieving, it's all of us, mind, body, and soul. And you are, for me and probably many of us, when you experience a loss of any kind, you have no energy. And your body's kind of like, and I talked about, what if you had an injury, would you take care of it? So if you can imagine your body in an emergency room daily for a long time, or in a hospital stay, your heart, your body, your mind, your soul, we need to treat it. And it takes all we got in the beginning stages for sure. But I had to start seeing Angie as I have all these mind, body, and spirit. So I had to start taking care of myself in all those little ways, and there was some real simple stuff because, we don't you wish we could just get through pain by going, okay, if I do, I buried my mom last week, and if I do A through Z, I'm just going to be done. Well, the heart don't work that way,
Right. There's no magic pill, right?
There's no magic pill. We're going to experience this. You can have a head full of knowledge and all that, but you're going to have the experience. And so, simple things in the very beginning were things like I had to have water next to me all the time and be reminded to drink it. Because I'd have the water there and just be completely spacing out because I was so tired from crying. But when you're crying, you're probably not eating properly. You probably need to, at least carry around some water with you and ask people to help you remind yourself to drink this water if you have to, especially in the very, very, very few days after. Carrying the snacks around with you because, I don't know about you guys, but I didn't want to cook. I had no interest in that. Now, I will tell you that I love to eat late 3 o'clock in the morning and stuff my face with cheesecake. But I wasn't eating very healthy, Chelsea, and so it would go from nothing to everything, and we're not sleeping well and all that. So I had to finally, and this is where Grieving Freely also comes into effect, is our scheduling. I had to honor that. I had to honor where I was, and not that I didn't go out and do life, but I kept a very light schedule. And so I kept my schedule, tried to keep it as simple as I could. I remember one day I was working with another friend, and we were trying to work on exercising as I was trying to heal. And, you know, I have to laugh now, and I look back at it. But my very first walk around the block, I was rolling my eyes the whole way, going, this is dumb.
Oh.
You know, what does exercising have to do with healing? But I'll tell you what, you know, what it did for me is, first of all, well, I had to take the whole walk. And when I got back, I felt different.
Mm-hmm.
I had gotten myself out of the home, smelled the fresh air, got my blood going, and I had accomplished it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a good feeling. It really was a good feeling. And, you know, I didn't have to do 20 blocks, you know.
Sure.
I kept it simple. I would take a walk around the park or a walk around the block or, you know, and things like that. So when people say, well, exercise, you know, I was one of them that would have rolled my eyes because I thought you were asking me to do, you know, go lift weights in the gym. And maybe some people will do that. They might go lift in the gym for an hour or so. But for me at my level, you know, I started out with a very light schedule. Exercising was very light, and it was just to keep me kind of busy through my day. And I got to actually pray during that time. If anybody is into that praying, you know, I would talk to God during that time that I was walking and try to see beauty in life. And that was hard. I mean, it doesn't work right away.
Yeah, right. Because you're like, yeah, so what? This doesn't matter. So, yeah, it is like you consciously have to notice the good in every day, especially when you're in the early stages. So. Right.
Yeah. And sometimes the only thing I could do to pull, you know, and look at anything good was, you know, enjoying, even if they were painful, some things that my mother had given me in life. You know, what had we shared? What had she taught me in life? What gifts did she give me? Sometimes I'd have to ask myself those questions and write them down, you know. Mm-hmm. And even because, you know, when you're grieving, you're pretty focused on the person who's passed. You're pretty focused on the relationship. You're constantly, the mind is constantly going over what could have been different, better, or more. Always. And and so if I can even concentrate on the good of that relationship, but then you say, well, what if the relationship wasn't that good? Well, I'll tell you, I have a lot of experience with that. What did I learn from those relationships where there was a harmful relationship? They made me stronger. They gave me a lot of strength that I didn't know I had. They taught me forgiveness. And those are big gifts.
I was just thinking that same thing. Those are huge gifts.
They're huge. Those are huge gifts. Forgiveness is a huge gift to experience. And so, yeah, I mean, in my life, I've had pretty harmful relationships because not everybody has these great relationships that most of us, you know, we get to experience. So we have to look at both sides. We have to look at the people who experience relationships in a negative way and how can we get them into looking at anything positive. And I had to ask myself, Angie, how did you get here? You know, wasn't it through some of the things that person may have you experienced with them? Mm-hmm. You know, I had an abusive stepfather, my sister Jenny's father, and he's gone now. He was very, very, very abusive man. But what I learned from that was I pass on to my son about respect with women. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if you dig deep enough, and sometimes you have to have help to do that, to find those hidden gifts in those relationships, if that makes any sense.
That makes a lot of sense because that is, very difficult to do. And I think, unfortunately, with so many different experiences that you've had, that's probably why you're able to help so many people. You know, of course, in your Facebook community, because, you know, suicide, losing a young sister, you know, like even deaths that can be prevented, you know. Or they probably really can't be, but our mind thinks that. Yeah. So I guess that's just what I'm trying to say is that's really another gift that you're able to assimilate all these experiences good and bad, or, however you would describe them, that, yay, I can put it to some good use and also help myself at the same time, getting fulfillment by helping other people. So that's awesome.
Right. Yes.
And tell me a little, we were going to touch on this a little, having both grief and depression, and I've actually had both, touch on the difference, because I know when I was newly bereaved, it was 9 months later after my mom passed away, at the company I worked at the time, there was a National Depression Day. I'm probably saying it wrong, but you could go get screened that day at certain places. So I went and got screened because I thought, oh, yeah, I must have depression. I didn't. It was just grief. But it is so similar. So what has your experience been there? Or how can we kind of clue people in
Tell
the
the difference?
Yeah.
Well, and this is just a wonderful topic because I think it's just probably one of the most important things in grief. I've been treated for depression most of my life, and there are times in my life where I can see that I was depressed, and then there are times, and then the other times I can really see that I had a whole life of grief and was never treated for grief. It was never mentioned in my doctor's visits. I think the thing is that, and it's changing now, there's a lot of people out there trying to educate the world on harming grievers with labeling them as depressed. And what I mean by that, because what happens is if you are just grieving and you are being treated for depression, you're going to be given most of the time an antidepressant, and you're not really going to be talking about your grief much. You're not going to be doing any of those kinds of things. You know what I mean? You have to have the right tool. I always say, can you take a box of soap and change a flat tire? You have to have the correct tools, or it's just not going to work. You know what I mean? But how do we know the difference? Well, I think really what has to happen, and I think it is happening in some areas. In some areas it hasn't even changed a bit, is that if we can get our educators and our, all the educators on the same page and say we need to change this whole thing with how we approach this. If you listen to my story, and I'm not trying to be sarcastic, but if you listen to my story, I think I've suffered from a lot of loss.
Oh, yeah, right.
Okay.
I know, that's why I was thinking, oh my gosh, you must have a soul contract with the amount of things you've gone through,
Right. But I will also tell you that this is the thing, is that let's say, we're living our lives and we're trying to get through, and, we're above ground and something comes up in our lives and we just start feeling pretty sad, and we go in there. We may be going in for one little thing that happened and we've just been feeling sad and we don't know why. But if we have grief underneath the surface that has never been treated, that might be really what's rearing its head.
Sure,
so,
like buried grief, yeah. Like when 9/11 happened, yeah.
Yeah.
That triggered a lot of people into their own buried grief, yeah.
Right. So I think that if we're going to diagnose people with depression, I think before we give them the final diagnosis, I think that we need to ask them on the same questionnaire about who they've lost. Have they had any health problems? Have they moved? Have they lost finances? Have they lost any friends? Because,
right.
Yeah. So if we can have something like that, I think there are a few places that are trying to do that. But do you know, I still don't see that stuff around where I live, as far as and I don't know if you've seen that on any kind of intake sheet where grief is there.
No. And I'm thinking of once, I can't think of the name of it, but they kind of rate the the most stressful times in a person's life, losing a spouse, and, it's like the top 100 and maybe the most.
Right.
Well, anyhow, I know I can visualize the study, but no, you don't see that.
And so what happens is we have all these grievers who slip through the cracks. because, a doctor can't read our mind, number one, and they don't have tons and tons and tons and tons of time. Neither do therapists.
Sure.
I understand that. But if we could provide a tool, and this is, and like I said, I think it's starting to happen, and I'm just a big advocate for it, is that we can get this tool to our educators, and that way, if I was a therapist and I'm sitting there looking at this piece of paper and this person's had all this loss, I might want to try to treat them for grief before I treat them with depression, depending on the situation, and I understand that. I mean, there's going to be some red flags there, but it would give us a better view, and I think it would help the grieving community immensely.
Yeah, and too, as a tip to listeners, sometimes if you are going to go see a therapist or counselor, it's nice to see like a holistic therapist, because they do the mind, body, spirit, and many holistic practitioners really try to work through all the methods they would have before they're prescribing anything. So that would be a tip as well. And one clear-cut tip I have is having both depression and going through grief. When I had depression, I had no reason to be sad, but I was sad anyhow, so I think that's a clear
there's nothing
sign.
going on. Yeah,
and you can't function. And mine what initially started due to postpartum, when your hormones are all whacked out. But I truly was happy,
Yeah, I've had a hysterectomy. I understand hormones.
Yes. So I just think that's a good guideline. Like grief, there's a reason to be sad, but depression, it's possible there's not that much going on, but you just can't function well. So from the layman's perspective, that's all I have to offer on that as well. And she also has a special gift for everyone on the call today. She would like to offer you a free 1 week in her online membership site, and her membership site is called We Care Grief Support, and it's basically an interactive online community to help you through grief and back into life. And if you would like to have this free 1 week in the community, all you simply need to do is send her an email. In the subject line, type free week. They'll get you set up, and the email that you send it to is called National Grief Awareness Day @gmail.com. One more time, it's simply National Grief Awareness Day @gmail.com. And if you want more information about Angie's site, that is called WeCareGriefSupport.com. And thank you, Angie, for making that available to our listeners. And perhaps some of the grief professionals might even want to check it out as well to see the resources that are there, because I know you said it was quite packed with resources. So thanks again for offering that for us. We appreciate it. And let me ask you one last question to close us out. What is the one message you would like to tell the world, if you could, about grief support? What's the most important message you want to share?
I think if I could give one message to everybody, it would be that it's okay to grieve. It's okay to be human, because that's all we can ever be, is who we are. And we don't need to push it away, because when we push our true selves away, we don't feel good, because we're not honoring ourselves and standing in that truth. So it's okay to grieve, and it's okay to show your emotions. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks, Angie. We really appreciate your time today, and I hope everyone will check out your site, just because I know it's super helpful, and as well as the We Care Grief Support. Thanks for the generous offer for people who are listening in on the call. We appreciate it. So thanks again. Thank you for having me.
Sure, and take care, everyone.